The Tower of London is considered one of history's most brutal and terrifying prisons, in which two of Henry VIII's queens were executed within the walls. Anne Boleyn and Catherine Howard were not the only queens who were executed inside of the tower, as there was another queen during the reign of Bloody Mary I, who was beheaded on Tower Green. Lady Jane Grey is known as the 9-Day Queen, who was ousted off the throne by Mary I after the Privy Council switched their support from the young Protestant girl to the Catholic oldest daughter of Henry VIII, Mary. But having Lady Jane Grey imprisoned inside the walls of the Tower of London was dangerous for Mary, as she was seen by Protestants and by many as the rightful queen, and the one who should have been reigning, as she was named the successor by the previous monarch Edward VI. So join us today as we look at the brutal execution and death of Lady Jane Grey, and remember to support our channel. Please make sure to subscribe. Lady Jane Grey was born around 1537 in Bradgate Park in Leicestershire. She had a fine and brilliant humanist education, and was stated to have been one of the most learned young women of her time. She was a great-granddaughter of Henry VII, so she had royal blood, and she directly inherited the crown from her cousin Edward VI on the 9th of July 1553. Edward VI, Henry VIII's son, had fallen very ill in January 1553, and ever since then he seemed frail, and despite being only young, he wished to make sure that his successor was a male Protestant. Because of this, he disinherited his half-sisters Mary and Elizabeth, and he looked towards his cousins as successors, but none had produced a male heir. But due to her strong Protestant faith, he turned to Lady Jane Grey, the eldest Grey child, to become his successor. Jane, it was said, would reign as queen, but the crown at the time could only go to a male heir. It was said that if Jane died without having a son, then the crown would pass further to one of the sons of her sisters, and this was signed off by the Privy Council. Edward's new plan caused a significant degree of changes. John Dudley, the Duke of Northumberland, sought to manipulate his way into power and the throne by marrying Lady Jane Grey to his son Lord Guildford Dudley. Because of this marriage, John Dudley himself was placed in a very strong position and could for his daughter-in-law get what he wanted. Lady Jane and Guildford would have reigned together as king and queen, and when she was 16 Jane married and Guildford was around 2 years older. Their match was seen as beneficial to both the Dudleys and the Greys, as with the new law around succession, it was believed that future Grey children would rule over England. It was John Dudley, Guildford's father, who was involved in getting Edward VI to pass over the throne, but when Edward died on the 6th of July 1553, Jane was immediately summoned. She was taken to Sion House, where she was informed that she was going to be crowned the Queen of England. This surprised the young Jane, and she became very distressed at the time, and this confused her Privy Councillors. Becoming queen was seen as a good thing, but it's believed that Jane was not prepared for this, and neither did she wish to become the queen. She became very distressed, and this continued even when her husband and parents arrived. She was very reluctant to become queen, but the following day Jane, along with her parents and Guildford, went to the Tower of London with her entourage. A procession of barges took her to the tower along the Thames, where plans were being drawn up for her coronation. It was tradition for English kings and queens to stay briefly inside the tower to await their coronations, and this had been done for centuries. When entering, Jane wore a long green dress of velvet, and looked every part the queen, wearing very extravagant jewellery. She would never leave the tower's walls. Jane was asked to wear the crown, but she refused to do so, but her husband Guildford had strong ambitions to become the ruler, unlike his reluctant wife. Jane continued to refuse to make him king, which angered him greatly. Jane also had a number of problems with her husband, but her biggest problem would come in the form of Henry VIII's eldest child, Mary. Mary had learned of the fact that Jane had been made successor, and she saw her as a usurper, and Mary wrote to the Privy Council, demanding that she should be the Queen as the rightful heir. Many members of the Privy Council believed that support for Mary would be futile and would easily be defeated, and they also sent a reply demanding that Mary should back Jane, and told her to silence herself. Mary refused to do so, and she had a large amount of Catholic support. She was a major threat to Jane, and an army was even sent from London to go and capture Mary. Princess Mary raised her own army, and John Dudley was told to go and capture her, so she could be silenced. But whilst Dudley was out fighting Mary's army, the Privy Council changed their minds and switched their vital support from Lady Jane Grey to the woman who would be known as Queen Mary I. Mary was proclaimed Queen after riding victorious into London on the 19th of July, ending the 9-day reign of Lady Jane Grey. The place which Jane was supposed to be enjoying the luxuries of being a queen, the Tower of London, now became her prison. She was imprisoned in the Tower's gentleman jailer's apartments, along with her husband, who was being held in the Beauchamp Tower. Inside this tower in particular is some interesting prison graffiti saying the words Jane, and this could even have been done by Guildford himself. As Mary I held Jane prisoner, she was left with no one, as all the Privy Councillors sought to impress Mary and save their own skin. Jane and Guildford were soon placed on trial for high treason. Mary I, as Queen, offered both of them a reprieve, believing that the pair were nothing more than pawns in the manipulations of more powerful men who sought to exert their own control. Jane, because of this, was granted a number of comforts, and she was allowed a number of servants to attend upon her. She was also allowed to take walks inside of the Queen's gardens, and to meet up with her husband there. When her trial came, there were a number of other defendants, including her husband, and all of those brought to trial were found guilty. Jane, along with all defendants, including her husband, was sentenced to death. It was believed that Jane, as she signed a number of documents as Jane the Queen, assumed the role of Queen and the title of it, and with this was guilty of being treasonous. Jane received a sentence that she was to be burned alive on Tower Hill, or beheaded as the Queen pleases, but it was later reported that Lady Jane Grey's life had been spared by Mary I. But this leniency did not last long at all. The Queen's religious beliefs and the plans Mary had to marry the hated Prince Philip of Spain made her incredibly unpopular in England. Because of this, there was a great fear, had by Mary, that a Protestant rebellion could see her overthrown and assassinated, and at the expense of Lady Jane Grey, who would become the Queen. A number of rebellions did break out across England, with the most serious being Wyatt's rebellion. The conspirators in this did not explicitly state that they intended to put Jane on the throne, but her father was linked closely to the plot. Mary then knew that to keep Jane alive was too dangerous for her, and she decided to offer her an ultimatum. Mary said to Jane she would spare her life if Jane and her husband converted to Catholicism, and they would support Mary, but Jane refused to do so, and with this, Mary signed Guildford and Jane's death warrants and ordered their executions. It was a cold February morning that Jane first witnessed the power and brutality of Mary I. On the 12th of February 1554, prison guards took Guildford Dudley, Jane's husband, from the Beauchamp Tower out towards Tower Hill. The short walk was accompanied by thousands who had came to witness the beheading of Lady Jane Grey's husband, the man who wished so greatly to become king. Jane refused to meet him one final time, and she worried it would be too hard for both of them to say goodbye. Guildford was taken to Tower Hill and was beheaded in front of a huge crowd in an execution that told the public of London to fall into line and support Mary I. As Jane gazed out of a window at the tower where she was sitting, she saw a horse and cart bring back the remains of her husband into the Tower of London, with his head separated from his body. Jane saw her husband's corpse and cried and wailed, distressed by what she saw. Mary did allow Jane some reprieve during her execution, and as she was a former Queen of England and a woman of high status, Mary consented to allow her to be executed in private within the walls of the Tower of London. This spared her being taken out of the tower and being executed in front of the public. An hour after she had witnessed her husband's remains being brought into the tower to be buried inside the chapel, Jane was summoned by the tower's guards. They knocked on the door of her chamber and told her she was due to die within the next few moments. Jane prepared, dressed in black, then she left her room and was escorted to Tower Green. On this small area of grass, bloodshed was sown into the lawn, with the executions of Anne Boleyn and Catherine Howard, two former queens, being beheaded on the spot. She walked calmly and slowly to the scaffold, and she made her final speech to those few witnesses who were sent to watch the proceedings. Jane said, "Good people, I am come hither to die, and by a law I am condemned to the same. The fact indeed against the Queen's Highness was unlawful, and the consenting thereunto by me, but touching the procurement and desire thereof by me, or on my behalf, I do wash my hands thereof in innocency, before God and the fact of you, good Christian people this day. Jane then read Psalm 51, written in her prayer book, and turned to one of her ladies and gave her her gloves, handkerchief, collar and gown. The prayer book was then passed to the lieutenant of the Tower, and she turned to her executioner, who was armed with his axe, and said, "Please dispatch me quickly." Jane, up until this point, had faced her mortality with calm and resolve, but as panic set in, this waned. The executioner tied a blindfold around her eyes, and Jane then panicked and started looking for the block to rest her head, and she cried, "What shall I do? Where is it?" And this would have been very distressing for people to have seen. The young teenage girl on her hands and knees scrambling for the executioner's block. A witness then helped her lay her head on the block, and she said, "Lord, into thy hands I commend my spirit," before in one swift blow, Lady Jane Grey, the 9-day Queen's head, was taken off by the axeman. Lady Jane Grey today is seen as the shortest reigning monarch in English history, but she's also viewed as an innocent victim in the scheming of a number of men who sought to claim power for themselves and manipulate her. She's seen as a Protestant martyr who was offered the chance to convert to Catholicism, but she stayed loyal to her faith and beliefs. But at the age of just 16 or 17, Lady Jane Grey was executed in one of the most barbaric ways. Once again, thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.